Okay, well, I will speak in English. I was asked to speak in English, so I hope you will understand me, I think. So, I'm going to share with you today some trends, some reflections on agri-food systems, sustainability. Of course, the need for transforming the agri-food systems. No, I will show you some examples, some numbers of why we need to transform agri-food systems, and then I will show you the discussion or some of the discussion that, in my perspective, they are very relevant from a scientific perspective that require, as Albert was saying, this transdisciplinary approach and the integration of different scientific disciplines, but also, of course, of the people who is part of the food system, right? Because this is what we are talking when we are talking about transdisciplinarity. And to start, I want to give you an example of how things were done in the past and how we should not do the things, right? No, the why when we do things like we used to do, we provide a message which are wrong messages, right? And actually the problem is that in the food systems, this is not working. Enter maybe?
Maybe yes.
Maybe down? No?
Strange.
Maybe the mouse? No?
The mouse,
Okay.
yes.
No, no?
Yeah.
So, and food systems is particularly sensitive to this issue because food systems is very typical system where science policy interface is very problematic, right? So it's an issue that if we need to provide very clear messages that have behind very robust science, right? And I will tell you later what does it mean for me also robust science, because when we include sociological perspectives, then the thing is more complex than when we only provide natural science data, right? So this is an example from one report from the FAO, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. It was published in 2009, and they did a very simple linear assessment where, because by 2015 we are expected to be about 10,000 billion people, we need to increase food production 70%. No, and this was this had major no, it was reported in the media. Many NGOs, many international organizations, no, calling for an increase in 70% of 70% production of food, because we will be 10,000 million people in 2050. Of course, this was very much criticized, no, because mainly because they were for a Malthusian, very simplistic approach, and because food systems are much more complex than that, no. First, because when they were talking about food security, they were focused only on this dimension of food security, which is food availability. But food security has, actually, it has 6 dimensions in the newest definition of food security, right? But let's go to the traditional, the oldest definition, where we do have 4 dimensions. And in this report, they were focused only on food availability, which is related to the amount of food which is available for people, which is produced, but not only produced, no? Because they were also focused only on the food which is produced. But in food availability, we have the food which is stored, which is processed, which is exchanged, no? Because food exchange is also very relevant in different parts of the world. They were missing access to food, which is very much linked to the price of food, right? But it's not linked to how much food is produced. They were missing the food utilization dimension, which is very much linked to the quality of food, not so much to the quantity of food, but food security is now called food and nutrition security, and implies also the quality of the food, no? Where we also look at, for instance, the nutrition profile, or the nutrients profile, but also, for instance, it's very relevant, the quality of water, for instance. No? If I am in a place where the water quality is very poor, and then I do have diarrhea, even if I have a lot of food, the food use I do is bad because, of course, I do have diarrhea, and that means that I am not food secure, right? Because this dimension is not achieved. So first, they had this very poor definition of food security, focused only on food availability. As I said, no, this linear assessment. They didn't look at the fact that between 1960 and 2013, the increase in food production has been higher than the increase in food population, and still looking at the amount of quantity, the amount of food that people eat, no, only based on the food security, availability, and amount of kilocalories. We still face undernutrition, no, with currently about 820 million people who cannot eat every day and have some undernutrition profile. But they also didn't look at the changes in diet, no, which is also very clear. We have faced a nutrition transition, which has implied some changes in our diet, and towards more what is called Western diet, where we have a high increase of meat, we have a high increase of sugar, we have a high increase of processed and ultra-processed food. And this type of diet is more resource intensive. No? It requires the use of more resources from our natural environments, right? They didn't look at this, so they didn't look at the fact that in the last years, no, from 1960 to 2013, actually we had passed, no, the main problem of food security is not undernutrition, but it's actually overnutrition. No? We do have a big problem of overweight and obesity everywhere. It's not only a problem of the global north countries, it's a global problem. And we do have now about 1,500 million people who are overweight, 2,000 million people who have problems of macronutrients, and they don't have really a good quality of the diet, and that means they don't are fulfilling the dimension of food use, no? Food utilization that I was mentioning before. So we really do have to address the issue, no, to introduce other data. Here, also something that they were missing, as I have mentioned, no, in this nutrition transition, the sharp increase in meat consumption worldwide, right? But more particularly in some countries, and I think this is very relevant. Sorry, no, not in every country of the world we eat the same amount of meat. So this is very relevant also when we are talking here about the need to reduce meat consumption. There are places where they need to increase meat consumption, yellow and white places here. There are places where we eat far too much meat than we can allow from a biophysical perspective, right? It's not only about our health, but it's also we don't have enough natural resources to really feed people in all the world with the amount of meat that we eat in those places, no? But here is also very relevant because I have used the example to show you the type of messages that we cannot provide, no, from science based on very simplistic analysis. I could do the same with the meat issue that is central as well, and if you want, we can discuss later. But I think anyway that here the data is that, as you see, we have increased our meat consumption worldwide, particularly of pig, poultry, and cattle, right? These are the three types of meat that we are consuming mostly, and they are produced intensively, right? And this we can, we'll not get into that, but it's another issue. And then another issue that they didn't raise is the fact that 1/3 of the food that is produced is never consumed. So we are using land, we are using water, we are using resources to produce food that is never consumed, not by us. It can be lost in the way from farm to the distribution place. It can be lost, that is called food loss, or it can be waste in our in supermarkets, or it can be waste in the households, right? So, but whatever it is lost or waste, 1/3 of the food that is produced worldwide is never being consumed. No? And that is another issue, another data, that if we do not follow a complex approach to the analysis of food systems, then we provide conclusions, no? And we provide some, in the science policy arena, we are providing some recommendations that have, of course, enormous implications, because if we are asking now to the farmers and to the food industry to increase 70% the production of food with respect to the production we had in 2010, this is crazy, because basically there are places in the world where we need to produce less, not more, right? And this is very, very, very key, just to show you an example of what we don't have to do. This is also, I like this figure. This figure is from the chapter 5 of the IPCC report of Working Group 2, right? They are based in, this is based in one study of child undernutrition in smallholder farming in subsistence agriculture, and they generalized this figure to not only to child undernutrition, but in general for undernutrition in smallholder subsistence farming. But it's also to show that the relation is not linear, no? So this is the relationship between climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and malnutrition in this small scale subsistence farming. And you can see that the relationship is not linear. There are many different factors that really are, that go from here to here, no? Because if we follow, let's say, the analysis provided by that FAO report, we could say, climate change will impact food system because there will be less food production. Because there will be less food production, there will be less food availability, which is this dimension of food security, and then there is undernutrition. No? That will be this linear, but the relationship is much more complex. For instance, no, we take a nexus approach. Climate change will impact water. No, there will be more water scarcity. Water scarcity will impact also food production. This is not a direct relationship, it's indirect, no, mediated. No, it's a cascading effect mediated through water, no, water scarcity. And of course, then there are also many other factors like climate change will increase the probability of different diseases, and these smallholders, which are already we have faces of undernutrition, are more prone to infectious disease, and then we enter into another cycle effect that, you know, have some feedbacks, positive feedbacks here that, you know, so that the issue is not so easy. It's not linear, right? And this is something that it has changed in the last few years in food systems research, and it's where I want just to put my focus today. Just to I think that we as scientists, we need to escape from. I am in an ecological research center, and ecologists are the people who are normally more open, also physicians, I would say, but they are more open to the study of the dynamics and complex systems. No, but you have to think that we come from people like they do food studies, agronomists, and all this, and this change is a major revolution in the field of agri-food research, right? Because they are not used to do this type of to have this type of focus in analyzing agriculture and food system, no? That for many years have been isolated and analyzed in silos, right? This is just to show you also the complexity and the change in the focus that we already had in the IPCC in the special report of land, where we analyze food system, no, and the complex interactions with the climate systems, with the ecosystem, no, including land, water, of course, biodiversity, soil, the socioeconomic system, always with the main outcome of food systems, which is to feed people with a good quality diet, no, which provides some, which allows people to have an active and dignified diet from the food they consume, right? Of course, there are other factors, but this is not. And this also has, as we know, this change has been also introducing other disciplines where agriculture and food also plays a central role. Here, for instance, no, the One Health approach, no, where we look at the health from a more systemic perspective, and we understand the relation and the interdependence. The health of population, the health of people is dependent, no, it's very much related with the health of the ecosystems, with the health of the animals, no, and this was very clear with the COVID-19 pandemics, and many different papers were published following this approach. But this showed that here, in this approach, a lot of agricultural and food research is already included, because a lot of the agricultural intensification, land degradation, land use is very much linked to the production of food worldwide. No? And this is has allowed also to introduce this perspective. No, the One Health has also helped a lot to introduce the systemic perspective in agri-food research, although here the focus is more into health and the interdependence of health with different actors here. No? Or another example of this nice trend, no, evolution towards more complexity and integrated assessment in science, like the Nexus approach. No, the Nexus approach. Now you know that the IPBES is doing this Nexus assessment of water, food, health, biodiversity in the context of climate change. But Nexus approach, there was a review that was published some months ago. It can be of many different. You can even add the Nexus. You can introduce whatever you want to analyze. Normally, water, food, energy is like the more classical, but you can make it as complex as you want to, and you can also include like poverty as one of the elements of the Nexus. No, so it doesn't have to be more material issues, but things like poverty or economic dimensions, they can be part of the Nexus assessment. But anyway, it's also a nice approach, basically, where we show that food systems, no, which is like the main issue from a scientific perspective, is that food systems are complex socio-ecological systems, and they need to be analyzed from that perspective, right? At least to address the major challenges related to food systems, no? Food systems, which basically are all the activities and actors that interact from the production to the consumption of food, which include, of course, food production. Everything before food production includes also the inputs required to produce food, transformation, transportation, storage, consumption, preparation. All of this is food systems. No? But I will focus today more into the production dimension and some of the interaction of production with the other components of the food system. No? And in the end, these are like the major challenges that we face in food systems in the current socio-ecological context. No? We need to provide food for all, food which is of a given quality, no? Which includes all of forms of malnutrition, not only undernutrition, but of course, as I said before, the challenge of overweight and obesity, which is a major problem right now. It's called the pandemics of obesity. We need, of course, to adapt to climate change. You know, food systems. You know, production of food here is something that happens open air, right, and is very much sensitive to the climate change impacts. No, food system. No, the whole food system. I will mention later is contributing 1/3 of global emissions. Right, so 1/3 of total greenhouse gas emissions. In the special report of land, we calculated between 21 and 37%, and latest numbers, it's 1/3, which basically is no what we already found in our report. But 1/3 of the total emissions are linked to the way we produce and consume food, and I think this data is very critical as well. Because normally food systems are not so central as they should be in all the climate negotiations and climate agreements. No, for me personally, the launch of the special report of the IPCC was a scientific success. No, because it was something that food system scientists we were really demanding for many years to the IPCC to do this. Food systems analysis that came up with this number, no, 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. But still, from a political perspective, this is not very much taking, no? Like, it looks like the agriculture and food are part of the negotiations, but really minor part. But when you look at the numbers, 1/3 of the emissions, if we could change, no? And actually, as I will mention later, agriculture and food, no? Agriculture is the only sector that has the capacity not only to reduce emissions, but to sequester carbon, right? Which is, you know, it should really give us an idea of really where we could put the focus, no? But of course, one of the things here, it is also that when we look at all of these different dimensions of food, we also need to think about equity issues, right? And I think here is very relevant because it is not only for the transitions of food system, no? In the chapter 18 of the IPCC report of Working Group 2, where they were talking about climate resilient development pathways, they were mentioning the 3 main focus when we are talking about climate policies, climate strategies, right? Which include mitigation, no? Drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation, and inequality. So when we are talking about climate change, we need to reduce inequality. No? And this is very relevant as well when we are trying to analyze whatever strategy that we propose, no? For climate change, adaptation, or mitigation, in my case, in food systems, that it doesn't result in a maladaptation, because then we are increasing inequalities. Like it's happening. For instance, we in chapter 5, you will see there is an example of maladaptation in food systems, which happened in Spain, and actually was part of a thesis, a PhD thesis that was presented in this university, in the ICTA, where the modernization of irrigation in Navarra ended up with increasing inequalities between farmers in the region of Navarra. So this is an example of maladaptation where irrigation schemes were proposed for an adaptation to climate change. It resulted in an increase in inequalities, basically because the investments required to modernize the irrigation infrastructures, only big farmers or those who had more resources could do it. In the end of the day, smallholder farmers could not afford to enter into the modernization system, and they had to sell the land or to rent the land to the big farmers. So in the end, if you don't take this into account, when you do one planning, no, and you don't take this into account, no, the social dimension or the potential impacts of your strategy, then it can result in a maladaptation, even if the initial idea was, you know, to facilitate adaptation, in that case, to climate change, no? So this is very key. So we know from, I will give you some numbers now, but basically what we know, and there is consensus, is that we need to transform food systems, no? This comes basically from people like Johan Roslund, that you know, he and his team, no, they developed the planetary boundaries. And when you look at the planetary boundaries, the fact is that 5 of the 9 planetary boundaries are driven mainly mainly driven by food, agriculture and food, right? So like water use, no, we use 70% of water to produce food. Land use, most of deforestation is linked to the expansion of agricultural production. The cycle of some nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, you know, the planetary boundaries is focused on nitrogen and phosphorus, which is central, no, in terms of the contribution of agri-food systems. The issue of biodiversity, you know, also that through land degradation, basically, and deforestation, agri-food systems are one of the major driving forces in intensive agri-food systems, is one of the major driving forces in the loss of biodiversity worldwide. as well as agrobiodiversity that also plays a very important role in adaptation to climate change, and of course land use and climate change. No, so planetary boundaries are very much linked to agri-food systems. And in this publication, what they say is we really need to transform food systems. And there is high consensus that we really need to transform food systems, right? This I already mentioned, no? And this is not only from the planetary boundaries perspective, but again, if we introduce social dimensions, what we also know is that food systems have very clear connections with all the SDGs. This is one infogram that was presented by FAO, and they already show the interaction are direct. Of course, SDG 2, which is linked to reduce hunger, of course, has a direct relation with food systems. SDG 13 about climate, or SDG 15 about the use of terrestrial ecosystems, also have, or 14 of life in the sea. Of course, they also have a direct relation with food system, and others have some more indirect relations. But at the end of the day, gender have a direct relation. Anyway, at the end of the day, also from a social perspective, agri-food systems play a major role, and the livelihoods of millions of people depend on just food systems, right? Healthy and just food systems, no? So when we look at transformation, we need to look at it from this social and ecological perspective, no? Planetary boundaries give us some information. There are other more societal aspects, societal issues that we need also to take into account. So, as I have already mentioned anyway, but the issue that when we are talking about transforming food systems, we need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated to food systems, no? And actually, some data show us is that if we don't change food systems, we will not be able to achieve the Paris Agreement. Personally, I don't think we will achieve the 1.5, but we are now more into the 2 degrees. But anyway, if we still put the focus into mobility, of course, is very important, into in buildings, all of this is very important, but we don't make changes into our food systems, we will not be able to really achieve the Paris Agreement, the major compromise, the major agreement that we did in Paris about the 2 degrees. This I mentioned, something I already didn't mention, but it's important as well. When I said before that food loss and waste is about 1/3% of the total food that is produced. That means in terms of emissions, that food loss and waste is about between 8 and 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions. All the food that we have produced and is never consumed is between 8 and 10% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, right? Which is huge amount, as you can imagine, right? Anyway, in trying to introduce complexity in the assessments, this is from working group 3, chapter 7, a follow, right? Agriculture, forestry, and land use. You know that the IPCC reports have, in my view, one major problem. First, that we do separated reports, working group 1, working group 2 is about adaptation, working group 3 is mitigation, we work separately. Although, for instance, in this assessment, Joffre was also part of the assessment, we have tried to create some connections, and there are some cross working group boxes and in different chapters where we try to work together, some authors are working group 2 and working group 3. Particularly, I am more happy with the special reports, like special report 1.5, a special report on land, where different authors from working group 1, 2, or 3, they work together in a particular topic, like the oceans, it was also one of the 6 assessment report, land and food, and 1.5, And the thing is that, but now when we present the data in the global assessment report, working group 3, we go to chapter 7, which is the, as I said, agriculture, forestry, and land use, and we have this, And we have this where you have the different greenhouse gases for the food sector, no, by the different components, no, land use and land use change, enteric fermentation, etc., etc. And here we provide by regions, no? And by regions we have, wow, Europe is doing relatively well, no, as compared to other regions. And we have Latin America, where, as you can see, land use and land use change is absolutely, I don't know how you say in English, disparada. I don't know how, but you understand anyway. And Southeast Asia, same thing. But what do we have here? This increase, no, these changes in land use is to produce some raw commodities, agricultural commodities, for the European population, for North American population, right? So we are talking here about palm oil. We are talking here about soybeans to feed, no, palm oil, you know, to produce or biodiesel or for the food industry is a very central ingredient in the food industry. And in the case of soybean, for instance, you know, it is to feed the pigs and poultry that we have seen is where we already had the major increase in meat consumption, and that some countries, only some countries in the world, are the ones that are contributing to this. But if we provide data like this, and this is where the greenhouse gases in the national inventories are already incorporated, this is not fair. This doesn't really respond to the reality, because these people are producing to fulfill the demand that we are having, which is not to fulfill our needs, is to fulfill our, I don't know how you say in English, caprichos, right? And actually, in the case of food, is very clear that we are also, in our case, no, we are going, we are abandoning, no, the diet, the Mediterranean diet, which is not more healthy for us, more healthy with the environment. No? It's a typical example of healthy and sustainable diet. And it has a lot of benefits, but we are not here. No? This is another example that I like to mention regarding livestock, no? Because as you know, one of the key messages when we were talking, no, when we published the special report on land, was we need to reduce meat consumption. Not everywhere, right? That was clear, just in some part of the country, some parts of the world, some countries. And this is from the, I like this, I didn't change it because I like this figure better than the one they already have now in the new report, in the 2022. This is from the fifth assessment report, but I think here is more clear, no? When you show the data of direct emissions, no, of course, enteric fermentation from cattle is, again, disparada. It's very high, no? And this leads to the conclusion, no, from, again, a very simple or linear analysis, that we need to reduce the consumption of cattle meat, because pig and poultry are more efficient when they are transforming feed into protein, right? They are monogastrics, and they produce less emissions in kilograms when we measure emissions intensity in kilograms per emissions per kilogram of meat, emissions per kilogram of milk, or whatever, right? But this is only direct emissions. When we make more complex, no, the analysis, and we introduce indirect emissions, which is, of course, the emissions associated in that case to land use changes to feed monogastrics, no, pig and poultry, then it happens that all feed activities, related activities, contribute to 41% of the total greenhouse gas emissions associated to livestock. So then it's not such a big difference between cattle and pig and poultry, right? So again, the need to make the analysis from a very much complex perspective and introducing different elements, because in the end, as I say, we are in a scientific arena, at least the people who work in food systems, which has huge political implications, no, huge policy implications. I think the case of meat is very clear, no. And here also is very relevant as well, the type of metrics we use. No, when we present data, if we present data like it's used in the life cycle assessment for the analysis of emissions for meat products or livestock, if we do for emissions per kilograms of product, then intensive production systems are more efficient, right? But when we look, for instance, no, we provide, okay, I am not looking at emission intensity, but the absolute emissions per animal. Then it happens that the animals, no, same animals in Europe, where we have, you know, the breeds, no, like Frisona, no, you know, high breeds with very efficient in the conversion rate and everything. They produce per animal more greenhouse gas emissions than an animal, same animal, less improved, no, in terms of more traditional breeds in India or in Africa, right? So again, here the metrics is very relevant because and the metrics need to respond to our necessities. No, and this is also very relevant. Here, if we do not have a problem of food production, why we are still using metrics which respond to productivity? No, this doesn't make sense. If we do have a problem of ecosystem degradation, then we need to look at, for instance, emissions based on resource by use, kilograms of CO2 equivalent per fossil fuel based inputs, right? And then extensive systems like sheep and goats are more efficient than monogastric, no? But I need to really adapt the metrics to the problems I need to face. And the problems are not the same everywhere in the world. There are people who need to increase their productivity because they really have a productivity gap. There are places where we need to pay more attention to other problems, like in our case, biodiversity loss, no, all this kind of ecosystem degradation. So in the end, with agriculture and food system, we want to arrive here. No? This is from the EAT Lancet report of the planetary diet, right? And this is where we want to arrive. No? At the end of the day, that the agricultural sector, in the end, is a net carbon sink. So it's not net emitter, but really a net carbon sink, which of course has limitations, as you know. Now we have very much degraded soils, and the capacity to capture carbon for soils is very high, but this will reduce with the time anyway. But this is where we want to arrive. And continue with the complexity we need to analyze food systems and to address food system challenges. I also like the way that we address this in the special report of land, where, and I have already mentioned, we didn't look only at mitigation, separated from adaptation, separated from the desertification, land degradation, or food security. We look at different strategies linked to or land management, or value chain management, or risk management. Here we have many of these strategies are linked to soil, right, to the management of soils, right? But you look at them with this table, you can see, okay, which strategies really have more impact in terms of mitigation, adaptation, for security, and then you can really target the strategies using a more complex analysis, not looking just only at mitigation and then I do have an impact because then it doesn't work for adaptation or it doesn't work for food security. No, it really helps to address the issue with a more complex perspective. But we can also even go further, no? And this is from the chapter where I participated. We can also look at, okay, and from all these strategies that can contribute to mitigation, adaptation, food security, and all, I can do an effectiveness and feasibility assessment, no? To see where, and the feasibility assessment, also including economic feasibility assessment, technological, institutional, sociocultural, ecological. So really, the assessment, when we are looking at these issues, have to be very complex. It's not because we are here, again, I don't know how you say in English, que nos jugamos mucho, no? There is a lot of things, no, that which are in place, no, that we cannot just test, see if this works or see if this doesn't work. We really need to make sure that what we are testing really works, no? And for this, we need complex assessment. We cannot just play. No? One of the issues that has been raised, no, in agricultural and food systems, one of the strategies, which is particularly where I am more specialized and more focused, is agroecology. No? Agroecology was raised in the special report of land. It has been raised in chapter 5 of the working group 2. You will see now agroecology everywhere. Let me just pass. No, we had in the 2019 the high-level panel of experts of the Committee of Food Security of the United Nations published this report with the 13 principles of agroecology. FAO with the 10 elements also 2019. And now if you go to the European course, you will have agroecology everywhere, right? So it's like the new it looks like we need universal solutions. And I work on agroecology, but I think it's very important that we understand what is agroecology, right? Because, and this is what I will also mention now. But anyway, what I wanted to, I'm not to go back because this one. Anyway, what we are, and this is from the ISTB report that Albert was mentioning, I already participated. What we are now is in this transition, right, towards sustainable and resilient food system based on agroecology, where we have, this is our point of departure, and we need to transition using, and this is very key, using in our assessment, not only scientific knowledge, but in agroecology, we work with the co-creation of knowledge with actors in the territory, including, and this is central in agroecology, peasant knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and local knowledge, right? This knowledge we cannot build from an agroecological perspective, sustainable food systems if we don't co-create knowledge, scientific knowledge, together with local knowledge, wherever the local knowledge is. It can be indigenous knowledge, it can be traditional knowledge, whatever, right? So that's very, very key, no? This is just one definition of agroecology from FAO, from the 10 principles, as an integrated approach which simultaneously applies ecological and social concepts and principles to the design and management of food and agricultural systems. And here there are issues which is clear, no? The co-creation of knowledge, no? Between combining science with traditional, practical, and local knowledge, enhancing their autonomy, no? Because we were talking about also ethical and equality issues. So enhancing their autonomy, one of the issues in current food systems is that the farmers are subordinated to the rest of the industry, to the agri-food system components, right? And here we are trying to enhance their autonomy, empower producers as agents of change, in the end of the day, to transform food and agricultural system, addressing the root causes of agricultural system, no, of the problems. Here, other definitions, no, but in the end, they all go to the same focus of defining principles of agroecology and not a strict. So agroecological practices depend on the local context where you will implement the practice, which has to be co-created with the local producers there, right? So I think it is very important because we need to escape from silver bullet solutions. No, and here agroecology is basically an umbrella. It's not a set of practices. No? This is something we need to escape because now you will see that is agroecological practice, and they seem to be like a list of agroecological practices which will increase the sustainability and resilience of food systems, no? From the production perspective. And this is not agroecology, right? I think this is very important also for you to understand. And another issue that we need to consider when we are talking about agri-food system transformation, and is critical when we are doing a complex assessment, is the framing we provide in our assessment. And we need to make this very clear. So I participated in this report, this one. This is a report from the European Academy of Science to provide advice to the European Commission, right? And they asked us to do this analysis of how to transition to a sustainable food system in Europe to provide some information for the farm to fork strategy, right? That we do have now. What happened here? That we already found that there were different. Actually, this was my It's based on my second thesis. But basically, what we found is that there are different discourses and different framings around food, right? So we found there is a framing of food as a human right, that you could see also in the EAT Lancet report, food as a commodity, food as a common good. And different framings of food implies different strategies and different policies to address the challenges of food. And I'm going to give you one example. This is for food security. There are different framings of the problem of food security. We do have a problem of food security. But I can say, this is from Benin. I can say the problem of food security is a problem linked to, like the FAO report, the inability of the system to feed the future world population. And then I will put my focus on reduce the yield gap, to increase productivity and continue, at some point increasing the production of food. But I say, no, the problem of food security is the inability of the system to deliver a healthy diet. And then you are focusing on closing the nutrient gap. But then I can say, no, is the inability of the system to produce equal and equitable benefits. And then you are talking about decentralization, grassroots autonomies. So the way I face the problem implies different research questions and different ways to address that given problem. And this is very clear in food systems. As I say, in food systems, we do have three major framings. Each of them implies different research questions, different strategies to address the challenges associated to food systems. And here, for instance, we did the analysis of the farm-to-fork strategy and different policies that in Europe we will need, depending on the framing that I give to food, which is different. And this is something that we, as scientists, also need to put on the table, the framing under which I do my assessment. Because otherwise, what we find is that scientists provide sometimes not only not complementary or different strategies, but contradictory strategies. Like some people saying we need to produce more, some people saying we need to produce less. And then policymakers is like, then what do I have to do? Because if you say I have to produce more, and then you say I have to produce less, and this is because the framing, when you started your research and the way you really addressed the problem was completely different. And at the end of the day, provide different results. And all of them are valid in the end. It's just that the research question was different. And this is very much influenced by your framing. What happened that now, when new framings are put on the table and we are able to understand these new framings, we get answer to some of the many questions that were raised when we say, agroecology cannot feed the world. I'm sure that you will have listened. This is like the typical question when you go to whatever presentation, but then we cannot feed the world. It's like, again, it's like, and then you have now a lot of data because the framing from which they have approached the research is different. And we found now that, for instance, people say, okay, we need to define agricultural yields and go away from tons to people nourished per hectare. And when I take this approach, it happens that agroecological production is more productive than intensive production. Basically, the amount of food that I produce in 1 kilogram per hectare is bigger than the amount of food in agroecology is higher than the amount of food I produce in 1 kilogram in 1 hectare of monoculture. Because monoculture are commodities which are to the global market, and in terms of kilograms per hectare, they are more productive, but we produce less food, right? So depending on, is it food a commodity? Kilograms per hectare. Is it food a human right? Amount of people nourished per hectare. And then the numbers change dramatically, right? It's just to show you why the framing is so relevant, and we need to make it evident when we are working on these issues. And then, some other data that also use more integrated, more complex assessment. Here, for instance, also looking at biodiversity is not only about how much food is produced, but also if we are facing a biodiversity challenge, because biodiversity degradation is very high. Then I can also look at which farms are more sustainable, also not only producing food, but also providing all the ecosystem services, NCPs, or whatever we want to call them, right? But what happened, because we were based, no, we had the idea from food as a commodity, the policies that we have developed, for instance, in Europe, in a state of, no, it's just to give you the relevance in terms of our research, in terms later of policy making. So we have the 2003 reform of the Common Agricultural Policy was explicitly targeting the abandonment of small-scale farmers that were not efficient from a productivity perspective in terms of kilograms per hectare. So now that we know that the small-scale farmers, which are the ones that have more capacity to really incorporate agroecological approach into the farming, which are the ones that produce more food and which are the ones that have more biodiversity in their farms, are the ones that with our policies have been promoting them to just stop farming, right? And we have, of course, favored land concentration and all these kind of things. So it is very, very relevant that we have to be very rigorous and very, very transparent on what we do, why we do, and how we do, no? Because otherwise the implications are huge, no? Well, again, this is an analysis that some colleagues have already performed, right? Also looking from a more complex perspective, no? Not looking only at one indicator, but how really agroecological, in this case for the European Union, how the agroecological approach can contribute to meet some of the different policy targets that the European Commission already put on the table with the Farm to Fork strategy. Or this is a work that I did with Eduardo Aguilera from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, where we also developed some scenario where we only make changes in the management of the farm, right, in the production part, or we make changes in the production and in the consumption. And in the consumption, we have 50% reduction of sugar, increase 3 times the amount of legumes that we consume, double the amounts of vegetables and fruits, right? So some assumptions. But the idea anyway that we wanted to give you in terms of having this not only production but consumption and this food systems approach is that I only change the practices. No, this is for non-renewable energy. If I only change the practices, what I can see, and here in yellow you have the non-renewable energy that is this is from animals, this is from vegetables, and these with dots are imported. This is to satisfy our demand of food consumption, but that we don't produce here, that is imported because of food which is produced somewhere else. No? Right now we are importing 9 million hectares from third countries to satisfy our demand. No? So only with changes really in the both in the production and consumption, we can really face the challenges, no? Reduce non-renewable energy associated to production and consumption of food, ammonia, nitrate in the water. I think we're not present here because this requires another presentation. But just to give you an example of this is for greenhouse gas emissions. Only in the agroecological, we will be sequestering 24 million tons CO2 equivalent in Spain, and we could feed the entire population of Spain in this study. We decided not to put a target for reduction of meat consumption. Let's say, no, like the dietary guideline, they say 50% reduction of meat consumption in Spain for a healthy diet. But we decided to say, okay, how much food we can produce with the local resources we do have in Spain, no? And the resource we obtained was we need to reduce 30% of the meat we consume, but what we need to change is the profile of the meat we consume. We need to reduce drastically pig and poultry and increase 70% the amount of sheep and goat that we eat, no? Cordero y cabrito, if we want to rely only on our resources and not having to import food from third countries. And I have finished. I have finished. What?
It's already 1, just to let you know.
One what?
1 p.m. So
Okay. It's only one what? No, I have finished anyway. So that's just
no, don't worry, don't worry.
something like some major, and that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.